Hi, this is Michael Sean. Recently I was asked a question. What's the single hardest thing about producing a podcast? Well, first let me point out that there are probably as many answers to that question as there are individuals answering it. But for me, the bi-weekly challenge is this: to make a better free-range Texan podcast than ever before. For us, there is no status quo. To say we are a different breed of podcast would be putting it mildly. We know that. So-called podcast aficionados will tell you that having a variety of information and storytelling and or entertainment all wrapped up into one will keep us from finding a niche. Oh, but on the contrary, we see all this as our niche. All I can tell you for sure is that it's all an honor and a pleasure, and that outweighs the challenge. What a great and privileged way to create one final gesture to a lifetime of work. The Free Range Texan Podcast. On a side note, I've often mentioned to people that the great thing about podcasts is that anyone can do it. And the bad thing about podcasts is that anyone can do it. So we invite you for half an hour or so to set your mind free. This one's on us. Enjoy. Because after all, they're telling me it's showtime.
7.
Start the clock.
6.
Stand by, Eddie Bay 1.
5.
Stand by, Sweetie Pie.
4.
Bring studio mics hot.
3.
Stand by, Michael Shaw.
2.
Roll music.
1.
Well, howdy, y'all. The Free Range Texan Podcast is underway. This here program is a special look at the way life is shaping up for folks in the U.S. of A., seen through the eyes of a born and bred West Texan. Our host is a veteran broadcaster who is known for his campfire visits on radio. Michael Sean is standing by.
I gotta jump out of an airplane today.
So here he is, our host, a real free-range Texan himself, Michael Sean.
It is the Free Range Texan Podcast. The podcast listened to in man caves and she sheds around the country. Oh, the stuff they come up with around here. Hi, everybody. This is Michael Sean. Episode 12. Before we get started out on today's business now, I just have to tell you that on our last episode of our Free Range Texan podcast, we had a special guest, Andy Wilkinson. That guy was great, wasn't he? Yeah, we still get a lot of good feedback on Andy being on the show, and we'll definitely have him back. But he talked about his latest book, Surprise Texas. I neglected to mention that the book Surprise Texas is available now on freerangetexan.net. You can find it on our blog, an interesting article there about Andy. Also at the Free Range Texan House of Treasures. All of that found at freerangetexan.net. What a show we got coming up for you here. I'm careful about how to tell you about this because I've always thought I was a little bit suspicious about people who would knowingly jump from airplanes for fun. Well, we've got a story about that. We refer to it as the shoot. Also, there is a very favorite thing. Anybody who knows me well at all or who works with me very much will know that I am a coffee freak. If you add it all up, my favorite kind of coffee is Cowboy coffee or campfire coffee. Man, oh man, I love a good cup of coffee. It's the first thing I do in the morning and off and on throughout the day. Anyway, we got a special story coming up about Cowboy coffee. Finally, I am saving the big deal for our third segment of the program. That, of course, is Daniel Jones. Now, if you are a past listener to our podcast, or if you have not gone back and binged a few podcasts to bring you up to date, let me tell you that Daniel Jones is known far and wide as a cryptozoology investigator. It sounds interesting because it is interesting. And yes, we have the unexplained files coming up on this edition of Free Range Texan, doing sort of a UFO update. And we've got just the guy for that. Daniel Jones is going to be on the show. As usual, we will do what we usually, always, habitually do. We wind up at the campfire. Why? Because it's a good place to wind up. Michael Sean's Campfire. So buckle up on the Free Range Texan podcast. We're getting ready to ride. And now, a story about jumping out of a perfectly good aircraft.
The old plane rumbles upwards towards the sky through the morning fresh air, struggling to reach jump altitude. A quarter of an hour earlier, we left the ground, a meadow shimmering in the morning dew. And now, I'm here, lined up with the others on a metal bench, wondering why I'm sitting in this noisy contraption. Let's be honest, I know why. To prove I can face the sky, my fear, the wind, and put my life at risk to understand its price and value. And what if it's a wasted effort? What if once I'm back on Earth, I'm just the same, timid, unsure? That's what goes through my head as I wait, squeezed in between my two parachutes. The big one, the back one, the Corolla, the mushroom that will open with a sharp crack at the moment I choose. Or the other one, the small one, the last resort, if the first one doesn't deploy properly or becomes entangled. Helmet, goggles, leather boots. I look like a phony rider of the apocalypse. My companions, all experienced jumpers, are keeping an eye on me. I've learned to steer myself in the sky, pulling on lines to avoid treetops, stretching out my arms, plummeting down, gliding, twisting, and then positioning to face the ground. Opening your chute. Not too soon, not too late. Being the master of your body, your mind, and the sky. The instructor has raised his arm. I have to jump. There are 10 of us. I'm the third. My companions are smiling. I jump. I stretch out my arms. My hands twisted. The two who went before me are tumbling below. The earth is getting closer. I must open my parachute. Pull the handle. A large white flower unfurls above me. Silence in the sky. The next 7 jumpers drop like stones and open their chutes. No, one of them has gotten tangled and is falling straight down. He opens his chest chute. The lines entwine. He's getting tangled in the lines. He's going to crash. I sway like a pendulum. I pull on the lines. I spin my body around to get nearer, to catch him. I hear his desperate cry. I've got to catch him. A bundle of fabric and cords with a desperate guy on the end who is about to die falls like a bombshell into the white dome of my chute, which crumples for an endless moment. I grip it with all my strength. The white dome redeploys. He clings onto me. We are facing each other in the blue sky. Behind his goggles, through the tears, there's a thank you with a feeble smile of astonishment. So now I know. I saved a man, and now I am one myself. Digital microphone will travel.
Oh, hi. This is Michael Sean. Turn the horses out. Let the dog in. Mute the phone. Check your email later. It'll be there. Pour another cup of Cowboy coffee.
You're listening to the Free Range Texan Podcast.
Today we're going to talk about one of my favoriteest things. That's my favorite Cowboy coffee. Now, make no mistake about it, old Michael is a coffee lover. I admit it. I love a good cup of hot coffee. I'm not talking about one of those expensive Starbuckaroos flavored coffee drinks. I'm talking about plain old strong black coffee. You take a generous helping of fresh ground coffee beans, throw them into a pot of boiling water. Now, some recipes call for an eggshell. Just crack it into the coffee. Whatever old campfire cookie knows, city slickers may not yet understand that an eggshell somehow manages to keep the coffee grounds in the bottom of the pot. So there are less of them, coffee grounds that is, in your tin cup. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking. Why can't the Cowboys just strain the coffee? That's exactly what many of them do. They strain the coffee through their most immediately available old sock. It's generally known that the coffee should be so thick that a 6-gun, or at least a horseshoe, can float in it. So if you're wanting real, authentic Cowboy coffee, you need to make it over a real, authentic campfire and drink it from a tin cup. Or a quicker fix might be go to where cowboys hang out and actually drink the coffee. It's a place called the Auction Barn. Cowboys and cattle ranchers go there to auction off their cattle and horses and goats and sheep and chickens. Well, maybe not chickens. Now, in all honesty, buckaroos, I had never actually got around to drinking coffee at an auction barn in the past, so I took a seat at the counter and ordered up a cup of Cowboy coffee. The impression I got from the waitress was that she might have rather been somewhere yonder as opposed to where she was at. "Are there eggshells in your coffee?" I asked. "Eggshells?" she said. "No," and she said, "I didn't strain it through no sock, neither." She said all that a bit sarcastically, so I thought to myself, she knows about real Cowboy coffee. This has to be the real deal. But peering into the cup, I realized that there was no way that a horseshoe could float in that. Now, the aforementioned waitress stood there and watched as I took a sip. My eyes opened wide. Should I spit it out or swallow it? The decision was made, and I swallowed it like a grown-up cowboy. "What do you think?" she asked. No, I'm not one to normally tell a bold-faced lie. I reasoned with myself that I'd never had auction barn Cowboy coffee before, but that's what they served. "Perfect," I said. So there you have it, my first auction barn Cowboy coffee. Good to the last drop. It's hot and it's black and I like it like that. No cream, no sugar, just smoke and sage.
and very much loved by the men and women who made it and drank it.
Whoa, who are those green dudes? Is this a new band for tryouts?
We are here for human specimen.
Take him. Take Michael Sean, the one who talks so much.
We can examine his vocal processor. Excellent.
Well, we dodged a bullet on that one, sweetie pie.
I wonder what they'll do to him.
Unspeakable things, no doubt.
You again?
Would you
What
get your hands
now?
off of
And
me?
why did you bring Michael Sean back?
Do you know
He
who
makes
I
too
am?
much noise. He never stops. We think he is broken.
Get out of here!
It's time now, once again, for the free-range Texan Unexplained Files. On this episode, we revisit the phenomena of UFOs. Here's what we know. UFOs exist. Our guest on this episode of the Unexplained Files is cryptozoology investigator Daniel Jones. He had this to say.
You've done quite a bit of research on the UFO phenomena, particularly in the state of Texas. Can you give us your thoughts on that?
Sure, UFOs are another one of those issues. However, when we look at its relationship to modern aviation, government, military, industrial complex, I think there's a whole lot more to what's been going on in regard to UFOs than what we're led on to believe by pop culture and the Hollywood media stories that we hear and see in the theaters. When it comes to Texas, UFOs are very prevalent, and not only just seen in the skies, but also crashes all throughout the state. You just have to go with the facts, go with the evidence, and see where that takes us. In 1897, and around this time frame, you have what's known as the Great Airship Mystery, back when the Wright brothers hadn't even brought out their flyer yet. It wasn't until early 1900s when that was even going on, before there's airplanes or any kind of conventional aerospace anything. One of the most notable incidents of the airship mystery deals with the Aurora incident, where an object allegedly crashed and exploded, hitting a windmill northwest of Fort Worth near Dallas. In 1897, there's really not a whole lot else going on. So if you see something in the sky, I think everyone's going to take note of that. And as this object came down in distress and crashed in this windmill, it exploded, causing a massive scattering of metallic debris. From the different people that I've talked to, specifically Jim Mars, who I'm honored to have worked with before he passed away, he actually talked to several eyewitnesses that were there. And now no one is alive anymore that did see that, but for those that did, who were children at the time, many of them have come forward and said, yes, it actually did happen. There was a crash, there was debris, and not only that, but the newspaper that was printed, reports from around the area that were included within it, suggests that there was the remains of a body were recovered in the wreckage, and that the remains were not an inhabitant of this world. You can look at that in different ways. I don't know that it was an alien. 50 years before the most well-known UFO incident in 47 in Roswell, which you have very similar occurrence. You have a crash, supposedly, with bodies and material that was recovered. The Pentagon has recently come out, as of last year, with their program that they actually use to investigate UFOs and what is known as UAP, which is unidentified aerial phenomenon. And this is a more official term that's used, so it's not getting so much of the pop culture baggage of space alien things. So with ATIP coming out, the program, Advanced Aeronautic or Aerospace Threat Identification Program, they have admitted to innumerable amount of videos, pictures, and things of this nature. A scientist with the program, Dr. Eric Davis, has come forward stating back in June of this year that they have at least two confirmed crash retrievals that they can share about, because a lot of this information is still classified, but they can share things that have been declassified or that they're getting out there to the public. The Roswell crash And the other one he mentioned was Del Rio. Not many people know about the Del Rio incident, where in 1955, a group of, Army military jets were flying in formation and witnessed an object of light going down, and one of the wingmen asked his commanding officer for permission to pursue the object as it went from Texas and crashed down onto the border of Mexico. This gentleman named Robert Willingham, who I highly recommend looking into his account. Robert Willingham went back and got his own farm plane and flew back over to the border, landed where this thing crashed, and by that time there were several people out there wandering about, and Mexican officials or authority figures were out there kind of guarding the scene, trying to keep people from getting too close. Robert seemed to have snuck around and come to what he described was the hull of the object, and he noticed a large crack in the side of it, and he peered into it, noticing what he describes as two beings, which weren't humans like you and I, and they were very thin, had room-like arms. His impression was that they definitely weren't human. Now, the interesting thing about this report is that, again, Dr. Eric Davis of the Pentagon's program, a scientist for this UFO program that's run by the government and military, has come forward and say that Del Rio is a confirmed crash retrieval by the U.S. So this means that they went over there, I'd like to say maybe with a giant, Chinook helicopter or a few of them perhaps, which have also been seen around other UFOs, to gather up the remains and fly it over the enormous gorge that is the Rio Grande Valley and bring it over to wherever they took it. They inadvertently, through admitting that, also were revealing, I don't think that they would leave those occupants of that vehicle behind. I think they're going to take all of it. They're going to take those entities, whatever they were, with them to do further study. So I think that they have really, in some subtle way, come forward and said, yes, the government does have crashed UFOs or spaceships or whatever they are. So there's any number of possibilities, but the whole idea is that they have their hands on what we're now calling metamaterial, which has been used in back engineering or reverse engineering ARVs, alien reverse engineered vehicles.
You've been listening to the Free Range Texan Unexplained Files. If you'd like more information about Daniel Jones or to get a message to him, go to freerangetexan.net and visit the blog. Well, clearly we have the planned and the unplanned taking place. I had planned to talk about something, and I'm taking just a moment, and I'm going to do it. You folks have no idea how much we enjoy around the studio here, getting the pictures from our listeners all over the country. Texas, from the United States, and from outside the United States as well. It can be you, it can be you and your girlfriend, it can be you and 2 or 3 of your girlfriends, it can be your whole family, it can be whatever you would like for it to be, but send your picture in, send your name, where you're from. And first they wind up on the blog, on the freerangetexan.net website, and then slowly we transfer them over to the Free Range Texan Facebook page. If you haven't been to our Free Range Texan Facebook page, go over there and give us a big thumbs up, will you? Anyway, it does warm our heart to get pictures from folks that are listeners to the show. We put them up around here. So you're part of the family when you send your picture, your name, and where you're from. So get your snapshots in to info@freerangetexan.net. info@freerangetexan.net. And we look forward to hearing from you. Let's go to the campfire. Hi, this is Michael Shawn. Welcome to our campfire. Heard a good story the other day inspired by Scott Geezy. It starts with a great horse lunging ever forward as its thundering hooves pounded the earth beneath its rider. The horse's mouth was thick with froth and its hair glistened with sweat. The horse's name was Pancho, 3 years old, and as sure-footed on the high desert as any wild Mustang. The rider went by the name of the Colorado Kid. He didn't choose it. It was given to him by newspapermen and authors of dime novels from back east. He'd never been to Colorado, but that didn't matter. The name had stuck. The Colorado Kid story started 5 years earlier. Then he was just an everyday run-of-the-mill Marvin Snodgrass accountant, 24 years old and very unhappy. His days were spent shuffling a mountain of legal paperwork. He was paid very little. His free time was spent with his head buried in local newspapers, reading endless stories of fortunes being made out west, stories of gold and the men and women who found it. So he headed west. Once arriving in the great Southwest, the fortunes that he searched for seemed few and far between. So he robbed a bank. And from that point on, there was no turning back. Soon after, he robbed another. He expanded his new way of life to include an occasional stagecoach. A close call from time to time came with the territory, but he never got caught. He attributed his narrow escapes to careful planning and a horse, Pancho. Pancho proved to be fast and long-winded, too. He could outrun and outdistance any horse that dared to challenge him. That's until today. You see, the Colorado Kid had planned another bank holdup. A manager and one other teller were in the building, but a customer in the barber shop across the street alerted the sheriff. A posse was formed, and the Colorado Kid had less than a 20-minute head start. Within the hour, a determined posse was closing in on him. Seems Pancho had met his match. Although most of the posse had lost ground, the sheriff was gaining. A shot rang out. Pancho stumbled and collapsed. The Colorado Kid tumbled in the dust. As the sheriff approached the kid, he found him kneeling on the ground, stroking the forehead of his horse, Pancho. Word traveled fast, and the ensuing trial was sensational. The trial ended with the Colorado Kid being found guilty and sentenced to 10 years of hard labor. He was never heard from again. Except, years later, a small-town cub reporter out in Oregon was writing a story about the stable in Kentucky that was making a name for itself, winning races and making a small fortune for the owners. In that article, a couple of paragraphs mentioned an older man who worked as the head trainer for the stable. His name was Colorado. Nobody, including the reporter, made the connection. That was just fine with Marvin Snodgrass, the ex-Colorado Kid. I'm Michael Shawn, and just another great story here at our campfire. Adios, my friends.
This episode of Free Range Texan Podcast is brought to you by A-Team PR. Thinking about creating your own podcast? Let the crew at A-Team PR help. A-Team PR is a proud sponsor and producer of the Free Range Texan Podcast. For more information, go to freerangetexan.net. That's freerangetexan.net.
Look, here's all I'm saying. I don't know what it's like on your job, but I just got thrown out of a perfectly good airplane and beamed up by a UFO. And that, my friends, is just another day at the office here at the Free Range Texan. Hey, we want to thank our cryptozoology investigator, Daniel Jones, for being on the show. We really look forward to next time, y'all. Take 'em home, sweetie pie.
Thank y'all for listening to the Free Range Texan Podcast, produced at A-Team PR Studios out yonder in West Texas, with our host, who's been voted the hardest working man in podcasting, Michael Sean. Feedback or submissions to our program can be submitted on our website, freerangetexan.net. That's freerangetexan.net. This is Sweetie Pie on behalf of Michael Sean and the crew here in Studio A, where we're all looking forward to spending time with you on our next bi-weekly episode of the Free Range Texan Podcast. Y'all come back now. You hear?